The invasion begins. The Crexian warships descended through Earth's atmosphere like falling stars, their sleek metallic hulls cutting through clouds as if they owned the sky, and in a way they did. The Crexian Empire had conquered 43 worlds before setting their sights on Earth, and not once had they faced meaningful resistance. Their technology was superior, their soldiers bred for war, and their strategy perfected over centuries of galactic dominance. Admiral Thaxor stood on the bridge of his flagship, watching the blue planet grow larger on the view screen. His 6 arms moved in perfect synchronization as he manipulated the tactical display, marking primary targets across Earth's surface. Military bases, communication centers, power grids, standard procedure. The humans had already attempted to negotiate, sending desperate messages pleading for peaceful resolution. Thaxor had ignored them all. The Crexian Empire didn't negotiate with primitive species. Down on Earth, Sarah Chen was finishing her morning patrol through Yosemite National Park when the sky began to burn. She'd been a ranger for 15 years, knew every trail, every hidden cave, every water source in her territory. She loved the solitude of the wilderness, the way the forest seemed to breathe around her. That morning she watched from a granite outcrop as San Francisco disappeared in a flash of light so bright, it left purple afterimages dancing in her vision. The invasion lasted exactly 72 hours. Human militaries fought valiantly but futilely against Crexian energy weapons and shield technology. Tanks melted like ice cream under concentrated plasma fire. Fighter jets fell from the sky when electromagnetic pulses fried their systems. Nuclear missiles detonated harmlessly against force fields that treated them like firecrackers. By the 4th day, every major government had either surrendered or ceased to exist. Thaxor established his headquarters in what had been the United Nations building in New York. The symbolism pleased him. From here, he would oversee the integration of Earth into the Crexian Empire. The surviving humans would be cataloged, their resources harvested, their planet transformed into another productive colony. It was all very efficient, very orderly, exactly how the Crexians preferred things. But Sarah Chen didn't surrender. Neither did millions of others who melted away into forests, mountains, and urban ruins. She spent the first week after the invasion moving through the wilderness, gathering other survivors, park visitors, campers, locals who knew the land. They numbered 30 at first, hiding in caves that didn't show up on any map. Sarah taught them how to move silently through the forest, how to cover their tracks, how to become invisible. The Crexians noticed the resistance 3 weeks into the occupation. A patrol of 6 soldiers disappeared while investigating a remote mining facility. Their bodies were found 2 days later, killed not by advanced weapons but by crude traps, sharpened stakes hidden in pits, rocks triggered to fall from cliffsides. The Crexian commander dismissed it as isolated incidents by desperate primitives, nothing that concerned the mighty empire. Sarah's group grew to over 200 within a month. They called themselves the Ghosts, and they learned quickly. A former chemistry teacher showed them how to create explosives from mining supplies. An army veteran taught small unit tactics. A teenager who'd spent too much time studying historical warfare online became their strategist. They studied every guerrilla conflict in human history, from ancient Rome to Vietnam to Afghanistan. They adapted, evolved, learned. The first major strike came 6 weeks after the invasion. A Crexian supply convoy moving through the Sierra Nevada mountains never reached its destination. The vehicles were found burned and twisted at the bottom of a canyon. The Crexians sent a larger force to investigate. They found nothing but trees and silence. Then that force started taking casualties. Sniper fire from positions that seemed to shift like smoke. Improvised bombs that turned peaceful meadows into killing fields. The Crexians had shields that could stop energy weapons, but they hadn't designed them to stop simple bullets or shrapnel. Commander Vrex, responsible for the western region of North America, grew increasingly frustrated. His soldiers were trained for conventional warfare against technologically advanced enemies. They conquered worlds by overwhelming force and superior firepower, but the humans wouldn't stand and fight. They struck from shadows and disappeared into terrain that seemed to swallow them whole. Worse, every harsh response created more fighters. When Crexian forces destroyed a town suspected of harboring insurgents, 3 more resistance cells formed in response. Sarah learned to think like her enemy. The Crexians were logical, predictable. They followed patterns, routines. They trusted their technology absolutely. She exploited every weakness. When the Crexians started using thermal imaging to track humans, The ghosts learned to mask their heat signatures with mud and emergency blankets. When drones began patrolling the forest, they discovered the machines had blind spots directly below them and moved accordingly. The psychological impact began to show after 2 months. Crexian soldiers, bred for honor and direct combat, found themselves jumping at shadows. They couldn't relax, couldn't feel safe even in their fortified bases. A cook at a Crexian outpost turned out to be a human spy who poisoned an entire garrison's food supply. A cleaning crew rigged explosive charges throughout a command center, detonating them during a strategic planning session. The humans were everywhere and nowhere, anyone and no one. Sarah coordinated with other resistance groups through methods the Crexians couldn't intercept. Written messages carried by hikers, light signals using mirrors across valleys, even trained ravens that flew between mountain camps. The Crexians had quantum communication systems, but they couldn't decode something as simple as smoke signals based on Native American traditions combined with modern encryption concepts. The transformation was gradual, but undeniable. Ordinary people became extraordinary killers. The retired teacher Sarah had known as Sweet Mrs. Patterson now crafted poison from mountain plants. The teenage boy who'd been scared of spiders 6 months ago could now slit a Crexian throat without hesitation. They weren't soldiers. They were something else, something the Crexians had no word for in their language. Admiral Thaxor received reports that made no sense to his military mind. Casualty rates were increasing exponentially, not from battles but from ambushes, assassinations, sabotage. The humans had turned their entire planet into a weapon. Cities became mazes of death where every window might hide a sniper. Forests became living traps where the trees themselves seemed hostile. Deserts offered no cover for Crexian forces but somehow concealed human fighters who emerged from sand like ghosts. By month 3, Crexian morale was crumbling. Soldiers refused patrol duties. Officers requested transfers off-planet. The occupation was costing more resources and lives than the conquest of the previous 10 worlds combined. Thaxor ordered harsh reprisals, destroying human settlements suspected of supporting resistance. It only made things worse. For every human killed, 10 more joined the resistance. They had a saying that spread through their networks. They gave us nothing to lose, so we'll take everything from them. Sarah stood on the same granite outcrop where she'd watched San Francisco burn. But now she wasn't alone. Hundreds of fighters stood with her, armed with stolen Crexian weapons mixed with human ingenuity. They'd learned to use the enemy's technology against them, combining alien power sources with human tactical innovation. Tonight they would hit 7 Crexian bases simultaneously across California. It wasn't about winning anymore. It was about making the cost of staying higher than the cost of leaving. The Crexians had expected to fight humanity's military, and defeated it easily. They hadn't expected to fight humanity itself. Every civilian was a potential combatant. Every building a possible trap. Every act of kindness potentially lethal deception. The empire that had conquered 43 worlds was learning what humans had known for millennia. In war, technology and strength mattered less than will, adaptability, and the simple refusal to surrender. As the sun set over the mountains, Sarah gave the signal. Across the continent, similar signals spread. The night erupted in fire and violence as humanity reminded the galaxy why they'd survived everything their own planet had thrown at them for millions of years. They weren't just fighters. They were survivors, and survival had taught them to be monsters when necessary. The monster awakens. The footage from the helmet camera was grainy but unmistakable. A Crexian soldier, one of the Empire's elite warriors, sat in what appeared to be a secure bunker crying. His 6 arms trembled as he recorded what he believed would be his final message. "They're in the walls," he whispered in his native tongue. "The humans, they're inside the walls. We can hear them moving, scratching. We sealed every entrance, but they're still getting in. Command won't respond. I think we're already dead." Admiral Thaxor watched the recording in his secured command center, his own scales shifting to a paler shade of blue, the Crexian equivalent of going white with fear. 6 months into the occupation of Earth, he'd lost more soldiers than in the entire conquest of the Rigel system. But it wasn't the casualties that disturbed him most. It was what Earth was doing to his forces. The proud Crexian military was dissolving into paranoid, terrified shadows of their former selves. Sarah Chen had evolved too. The park ranger who once rescued lost hikers now orchestrated psychological operations that would have impressed history's greatest military minds. She'd learned that breaking the enemy's spirit was more effective than breaking their bodies. The Crexians feared the unknown, the unpredictable, so she gave them chaos wrapped in calculated precision. The tunnel networks were her masterpiece. Months of careful digging, often by hand to avoid detection, had created a labyrinth beneath major Crexian installations. The humans moved through these passages like blood through veins, emerging where least expected. They would appear in secure areas, leave disturbing messages written in Crexian blood, and vanish before anyone could respond. Sometimes they took nothing, killed no one, just left evidence of their presence. The psychological impact was devastating. Lieutenant Marcus Rodriguez, a former Marine who'd joined Sarah's network, pioneered what they called horror tactics. He studied Crexian psychology, their fears, their cultural taboos. Crexians valued order above all else, so the resistance created chaos. They valued honor in combat, so the humans denied them any opportunity for honorable battle. But most importantly, Crexians feared contamination, disease, anything that could corrupt their supposedly pure genetic lineage. Marcus had teams collecting diseased animal carcasses and leaving them in Crexian water supplies. Not enough to cause actual illness, their alien biology was too different, but enough to trigger their contamination protocols. Entire bases would shut down for decontamination. Soldiers would undergo lengthy purification rituals, and paranoia would spread faster than any actual disease could. The transformation of humanity into something monstrous wasn't lost on Sarah. She remembered the woman she'd been before the invasion, someone who'd dedicated her life to protecting nature, preserving beauty, helping others. Now she spent her days planning how to inflict maximum psychological trauma on sentient beings. But every time doubt crept in, she remembered San Francisco disappearing in nuclear fire. She remembered the children vaporized in their schools. The Crexians had awakened something ancient in humanity, something that had been sleeping since they'd become civilized. Dr. Yuki Tanaka, a psychiatrist who'd joined the resistance, documented the change. "We're reverting," she wrote in her hidden journal. "Not to primitive humans, but to something more fundamental. The part of us that survived ice ages, predators, disasters, the part that would do anything, become anything, to ensure our genetic line continues." The Crexians thought they were fighting Homo sapiens. They're actually fighting the entire evolutionary history that created us. The tipping point came 7 months into the occupation. A young woman named Jessica Park, whose entire family had been killed in the initial invasion, volunteered for a mission everyone knew was suicide. She would infiltrate the Crexian command ship in orbit, using stolen codes and a captured shuttle. Her mission wasn't to destroy the ship, that was impossible. Her mission was to deliver a message. Jessica reached the ship's communication center before being detected. In the 30 seconds before Crexian security killed her, she broadcast something to every Crexian receiver in the solar system. Not words, but images. Pictures of Crexian soldiers being slowly dissected by human medical students studying alien anatomy. Videos of captured Crexians being forced to watch as humans destroyed religious artifacts, taken from Crexian temples on conquered worlds. And finally, coordinates, not of Earth, but of the Crexian homeworld. The message was clear. Humans had somehow acquired the location of the Empire's capital. And if the Crexians thought Earth was hell, they hadn't imagined what humanity would do if the war spread to their sacred home planet. Admiral Thaxor's 6 hands trembled as he processed the implications. It was impossible. Humans had no interstellar capability. They couldn't possibly reach the homeworld. But then again, 6 months ago he'd thought humans couldn't possibly resist Crexian occupation. The Admiral had learned not to underestimate human impossibilities. The paranoia spread through Crexian ranks like wildfire. Every human collaborator became suspect. Had they been feeding intelligence to the resistance all along? Every piece of technology that had gone missing was now potentially reverse-engineered. Every Crexian who'd had extended contact with humans might be compromised, might have inadvertently revealed crucial information. Sarah watched from her mountain stronghold as Crexian forces began to eat themselves alive with suspicion. She'd learned from human history. The greatest victories came not from defeating the enemy's army, but from making the enemy defeat themselves. Sun Tzu would have been proud. So would the Viet Cong, the Afghan Mujahideen, and every guerrilla force that had turned a superior enemy's strength against them. The Crexian military doctrine began to collapse. Soldiers refused to leave fortified positions. Officers questioned every order, wondering if it was leading them into another trap. Supply lines, constantly harassed by invisible enemies, barely functioned. The Empire was spending more resources holding Earth than they'd gained from conquering it. And through it all, the human resistance grew stronger, learning from every encounter, adapting to every countermeasure. Marcus Rodriguez led the attack that finally broke Crexian resolve. Using stolen Crexian technology combined with human innovation, his team managed to override the IFF systems in an orbital bombardment platform. The Crexians' own weapons turned against them, destroying their primary command base in North America. The message was clear. Humans hadn't just learned to use Crexian technology, they'd learned to make it betray its creators. The horror of what humanity had become was reflected in intercepted Crexian communications. One soldier described Earth as the planet where honor goes to die. Another called humans the species that weaponized insanity. But perhaps the most telling was a report from a Crexian xenopsychologist. Humans possess a unique psychological trait. When faced with extinction, they don't seek survival through submission or negotiation. They ensure that any species that threatens them will never threaten anyone again. They become the monster that other monsters fear. Sarah received word through the resistance network that Crexian forces were withdrawing from major cities, not redeploying but actually leaving. Ships that had brought death were now evacuating troops who looked more like refugees than conquerors. The mighty Crexian Empire, undefeated in 43 conquests, was retreating from Earth. But humanity had paid a price for victory. Not just in lives lost, but in what they'd become. Sarah stood among her fighters, men and women who'd transformed from teachers, doctors, and office workers into ruthless killers. Children who should have been in school had learned to build bombs. Elderly people who should have been enjoying retirement had become poisoners and saboteurs. Earth had survived, but at the cost of embracing the darkness that civilization had tried to suppress. Dr. Tanaka's final journal entry was perhaps the most profound. We won because we were willing to become worse monsters than our enemies. The Crexians came as conquerors but left as the conquered, not by our technology or our strength, but by our willingness to sacrifice our own humanity for survival. The galaxy will remember Earth not as a victim, but as a warning. This is what happens when you corner humanity. We become the thing that makes demons run. Admiral Thaxor's final report to the Crexian High Command was brief but chilling. Recommend immediate quarantine of Sol system. Humans are not a species. They are a weaponized survival mechanism. They will sacrifice anything, become anything to ensure their continuation. We didn't invade Earth, we awakened it, and now it knows we exist. As the last Crexian ship departed Earth's orbit, Sarah Chen stood on her familiar granite outcrop. The city still burned, millions were dead, and the planet would take generations to recover. But humanity had survived. They'd looked into the abyss of extinction and hadn't blinked. Instead, they'd become the abyss and made their enemies blink first. The park ranger who'd loved the peace of nature had become something else. Something necessary, something terrible. As she watched the alien ships disappear into the stars, she wondered if humanity could find its way back from what it had become, or if the monster, once awakened, would forever remain just beneath the surface, waiting for the next threat to emerge. The galaxy had learned a valuable lesson. Humans were not warriors by choice but by necessity, and when that necessity arose, they didn't just fight to win. They fought to ensure that no one would ever make the mistake of threatening them again. Earth was free, but the cost of that freedom would echo through human psychology for generations to come. They had saved their world by becoming the monsters that other monsters would tell stories about in the dark corners of the galaxy. The war was over, but the legend of what humanity had become was just beginning to spread among the stars.